Welcome, Elgin High School 1. Okay, I believe it's time, according to my computer and my watch, so let's get rolling. My name is Bill Graham, and I'm talking to you from Guaymas, Sonora, Mexico. That's Guaymas. And Sonora is a Mexican state that touches Arizona. And I'm about 250 miles due south of Tucson, Arizona, and we are right on the Sea of Cortez. The beach is about a half a block away from my house. I'm sitting in my house. I'm in my playpen. As you can see in the background, there's some model airplanes. So I'm a kid at heart. I want to chide you guys a little bit. I was born and raised in Chicago, so I know how you're dealing with the weather right now. But I must tell you, it'll be 80 degrees down here. So I'm not feeling too bad. But I must tell you that Mexican people are very, very sensitive to cold weather. When it reaches 40 degrees Fahrenheit down here, the government closes down the schools. And even in 50 degree and sometimes 60 degree weather, my students will come to class in ski jackets. So we're fairly sensitive to the cold. But it's a little funny to us gringos to see all these Mexican folks wrapped up when the rest of us feel that the temperature is just fine. So anyhow, we're going to talk about a subject today that isn't talked about too much. You don't see it under titles like connections or interconnections or anything like that in your biology books. The closest you probably get to it in your studying biology is food chains and food webs. But what I'm going to talk about today is the incredible importance to your survival and the survival of everything on Earth, to the interconnections that take place. And I hope to achieve a little bit of consciousness in your minds and hearts about conserving connections, because if you don't conserve connections, you're going to die. That's all there is to it. And I'm going to try to show you a little bit about how connections are in nature are deeply related to biodiversity. So I've had a cold this last week, and my throat was not what I would want it to be to get up and talk. So what I've done is, during a period when I was feeling better, I went ahead and did my seminar in a video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run my seminar, or webinar as you call it here, from a video, and we're going to go for about 30 minutes, just a little bit over. And then I want to open this thing up to discussion. Welcome Canton Middle School, 7th grade. So I would really hope that you folks are going to be thinking of some questions and some discussion, and hopefully we can enter into a dialogue, and you can put you key your questions in, and then I can see them here and I can start the dialogue. I don't know if there's any way that you can talk to me directly through a microphone. That would be fun, but I don't think that's possible. So you guys will do it digitally, and I'll respond verbally. So let's get started with the video.
The fact is that you cannot exist. Think about this question for a moment. Either through the course of natural events or acts of humanity. What would happen to you and your family if the sun stopped shining? The fact is that you cannot exist on planet Earth solely on your own. You are equal partners with everything else in the universe, including our sun. From the most minuscule atomic particle to the grandest galaxies, the past, the present, and the future of every animate and inanimate being in our universe, including you, is defined by its relationship with everything else. It is these relationships, these connections in nature, that we're going to talk about in this webinar. One such connection in nature is nature's energy chain that starts with the sun's energy. This energy is received and stored by plants. In eating these plants, animals such as ourselves receive and store this energy in the cells of our bodies. Meat-eating animals receive and store their life energy by eating these creatures who eat plants. In Earth's act of recycling, waste is returned to the earth to become nutrients for more plants. This chain, which we will discuss later in the webinar, is one example of a connection in nature where we are completely dependent on the sun's energy as well as the earth's plants and animals that store that energy. Now think about how the gas tank in your car is connected to your car's engine. Gasoline flows through a piece of tubing from your gas tank to your car's engine. If you were to cut the tubing, your engine would stop running because it could no longer receive the gasoline that contains the energy that your engine needs to operate. Connections in nature are like the gasoline supply tubing in your car that transports energy to your car's engine. Connections in nature are an essential part of our engine of life. Connections in nature are the conduits for transporting energy from one thing in nature to the next, such as in this forest. Energy is the fuel of nature. Without fuel, nature will not operate. Without fuel lines, nature's plants and animals cannot receive the energy that is needed for life to exist. Now, mankind's alteration of ecosystems can impair or destroy connections in nature. This results in impaired or destroyed energy flow. The elimination of keystone predators, gaseous emissions that impair the flow of our sun's energy, the alteration of river systems, and the destruction of forests are examples of how humanity has affected important connections in nature that have resulted in altered energy flow. Said in another way, if nature's gas hose is damaged or destroyed, life is damaged or destroyed. Now, because the connections in nature are the essential energy highways in which nature's energy flow takes place, it's the job of stewards of nature, such as yourselves, to identify, to understand, and to preserve these connections. A conservation strategy of protecting connectivity in nature's ecosystem protects the system's ability to transport energy and utilize energy. A healthy and biodiverse ecosystem uses the many interconnections of the plants and animals within that ecosystem to receive life-giving energy and to transport energy to other species. Since we're going to be talking about ecosystems and biodiversity, let's take a moment to define these terms. An ecosystem is defined as a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. An ecosystem is a complex, interconnected system of energy flow conduits. Now, biodiversity is one of those words that describes something that is always good, but is never really explained. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines biodiversity as the existence of many different kinds of plants and animals in an environment. I've read this definition many times, and I'm always left with the feeling of, so what? But When I probe further and ask why biodiversity is a good thing, I'm told that more plants and animals in an ecosystem provide greater resilience. And the removal of a plant or an animal from the ecosystem could cause some ecological damage. This explanation helps, but we still don't precisely know what biodiversity is all about. Well, a more descriptive definition of biodiversity might be the effect of the interconnectivity of life within an ecosystem. Biodiversity addresses the importance of interconnections between living things because biodiversity facilitates the flow of life-giving energy in nature's ecosystems. One term that you will find when you're searching for definitions of biodiversity is ecological biodiversity. Ecological biodiversity is defined as a variety of ways in which species interact with each other and their environment. So when I use the term biodiversity, I choose to use it to describe the ecological value of relationships within and between species in the ecosystem. Now, we said that energy is the fuel of life. From the smallest cells in our bodies to huge elephant herds, every living thing needs energy to live. The energy that is contained in the living cells of our bodies, in the food that we eat, or in sunlight flows from one organism to the next. We've also said that connections in nature are the conduits for this energy flow. Whenever there's a large or a small group of living things, you will find that nature's communities are connected together in many different ways. It's these relationships that define biodiversity. If plants and animals within an ecosystem have many energy conduits, we can say they live within a biodiverse ecosystem. This means that if one energy connection were within the group of many connections destroyed, chances are small that this act would affect the entire ecosystem. However, if there's only one energy connection between two key elements of an ecosystem, the destruction or alteration of this single energy flow conduit could cause a collapse of energy flow within the ecosystem because of a cascading effect where many species are ultimately destroyed. Now, the honeybee is a key connection in nature because it transports the energy of new life. If this key pollinator of many plants were killed off with pesticides, the human population would be adversely affected because without the honeybee working as a pollinator, parts of our food supply would no longer exist. In order to gain greater knowledge about the relationship between biodiversity and energy flow, let's look deeper into what nature's connections look like. The process of transferring energy in the form of food from one organism to the next is called a food chain. Later, I'll describe the food web, which is a collection of food chains. But let's keep things simple for the moment. Each organism in the food chain receives energy by eating the previous organism in the food chain. This organism provides energy to the next organism in the chain by becoming its food, and so on. This chain of energy flow is vitally important because it is the energy conduit that each organism relies upon for receiving the fuel that it takes to live. Ecologists categorize living things into groups that are defined by how they transform and transport energy. Each definition describes how a group member lives and interacts with other organisms in the group, as well as organisms outside of the group. Ecosystems are made up of some or all of these groups. The group at the beginning of the energy flow chain is called producers. The organisms within this group are all of the plant kingdom, including trees and grass, as well as algae, such as seaweed. The individuals in this group are the primary energy source within an ecosystem because these organisms receive energy from a source outside of this ecosystem, namely our sun. The cells inside of these organisms, using a compound called chlorophyll, transform the sun's energy to produce simple energy-storing chemical compounds known as sugars and carbohydrates. This process is known as photosynthesis, and it also produces oxygen that is released into the atmosphere. This is the oxygen that we and other creatures require to sustain life. This is why forests and meadows are so important to life on Earth. This is why we consider deforestation by mankind as a broken connection in nature. Now, herbivores, or plant eaters, are creatures that receive their energy by eating the plants and algae in the producer group. Examples of herbivores are insects, birds, fish, and the pronghorn antelope shown here. Carnivores, or meat eaters, get the energy necessary for life by eating other animals, including herbivores. Carnivores are sometimes called predators. Wolves are a famous predator that eats herbivores such as deer and elk. Omnivores eat both plants and animals. A bear eats both berries and salmon. We humans are omnivores. Now, scavengers receive their energy by consuming the bodies of plants and animals that have died. The turkey vulture, commonly considered to be nature's garbage collector, is a scavenger that gets its energy by eating dead animals. Decomposers, like mushrooms, mildew, mold, and toadstools, are not plants. They're called fungi. They don't have chlorophyll, so they can't make their own food. Fungi absorb the nutrients from the organisms they are decomposing. Fungi release enzymes that decompose dead plants and animals to provide nutrients to the producers, our plant kingdom. Now, parasites live on or in the bodies of living things. They are totally dependent on their host. Examples of parasites are tapeworms and bedbugs. Bedbugs are parasitic insects that feed exclusively on blood. The common bedbug is the best known as it prefers to feed on human blood. Yuck. Now, while we've been talking about ecosystems that thrive above ground in sunlight, there's also highly interconnected ecosystems underground. Much of that forest or meadow we see above ground also resides underground in an invisible world that we can't see without a microscope or some form of chemical analysis. Yet that secret underground world is a vital connecting force that is essential for the maintenance and the survival of what we see above ground, including we humans. Dirt is of fundamental importance for global carbon and nutrient cycles that contributes to ecosystem functioning. We can explain much of the nature that we see above ground from what is happening in the soil. Indeed, we humans are connected to dirt. We need dirt to live. The plants of our forest or the meadow reach outward and upward for air and for light energy from the sun. But these plants also reach downward into the dirt to engage a highly complex, interconnected subterranean ecosystem that supplies physical support, nutrients, and water. In turn, the network of organisms in soil receive carbohydrate from the above-ground forests and meadows. Underground systems of fungal threads serve to communicate between plants. They are the internet of the plant world. This is another important example of interconnectivity in nature. Subterranean biodiversity is just as important to your life as the biodiversity we usually see above ground. Well, as you can see from the description of each group, everything depends upon everything else for its supply of energy, which is the fuel of life. Plants need the sun. Herbivores need plants. Carnivores eat herbivores. Decomposers recycle the nutrients of dead organisms into new energy for plants. The recycle continues. Food chains are not just another lesson in your biology class. They are a critical part of your existence. Well, the simple food chain that I just described cannot exist solely on its own. Food chains are part of other food chains. One food chain is simply one path that a creature might take to find and receive food energy. Many creatures are part of more than one food chain because they eat a variety of foods. These interconnected food chains are part of a more complex system of interconnections known as a food web. All organisms in a food chain or a food web have some role to play in the resulting ecosystem. Any change in the connections between organisms can cause problems in the whole food web. From microscopic organisms to the great whales, the image in this slide portrays the complexity of the food web in the southern Atlantic Ocean. That heavy line that runs through the diagram represents the direct energy links between the krill and other creatures. If you look carefully, you will see the energy network that starts with the microorganisms that are eaten by krill and ends with the large whales eating the krill. Throughout that network, other creatures also eat the krill. These creatures are then eaten by other creatures. So what would happen to this large biodiverse ecosystem if the krill were to disappear because of reduced solar energy, or climate change, or other changes in nature due to man's carelessness? Mentally remove that heavy line which represents the food energy connection that krill provides. How many different species would disappear? The humble krill is called a keystone species because it is a vitally important part of the chain of energy flow from small creatures all the way to the great whales. All of these creatures would disappear if the krill disappears. Now, in another example, the current use of pesticides is killing a large number of bees. Bees pollinate a significant majority of the world's food, and these vital pollinators are in serious trouble. In North America alone, honeybees pollinate nearly 95 kinds of fruits and nuts, including almonds, avocados, cranberries, and apples. Humans, animals, and birds rely on the pollination services of bees. But bees and other pollinators are reaching a tipping point, with beekeepers reporting annual losses of a third or more in recent years. This is happening because of the indiscriminate use of chemical pesticides by mankind. These pesticides are breaking an important energy link in the complex network of life. Now, it's important to note that mankind does not cause all changes in nature. It's important to understand that environments are constantly changing on their own without human impact. Ecosystems are in a constant dance as their components compete, react, evolve, migrate, and form new communities. Geological upheaval, evolution, climatic cycles, fire, storms, and population dynamics see to it that nature is always changing. On Hawaii, volcanic activity wipes the slate clean on any given slope every few hundred years, and occasional new arrivals to the islands, washed ashore or drifting in on the wind, adapt to their new home and find a place for themselves in its ecosystem. A healthy, robust environment evolves and adapts to these naturally changing conditions. Even small changes in an ecosystem can have far-reaching effects. These small changes and their effects are humanly impossible to predict. Healthy food webs within ecosystems ensure that biodiversity is supported. This is because healthy food webs have many different connections that can supply the energy of life. If one energy connection were broken, it's likely that many other connections would still be available to supply energy. This characteristic is known as resilience. Resilience is the capacity of a system to deal with changing conditions in a way that is beneficial to the system and the creatures that are part of the system. We humans are just beginning to understand that the relationships between and within animal and plant species are incredibly complex. Science is now beginning to discover that we are unable to predict the future of ecosystems because it is humanly impossible to understand the impact of any human activity on the highly complex relationships that exist in an ecosystem. Healthy, biodiverse ecosystems consist of highly complex energy transportation networks. Any tampering by mankind, no matter how well-meaning, might affect the resilience of a natural system. This is because in a complex system, it's impossible to predict the outcome of any action. Think about the weather for a minute. You might be able to predict the weather up to 10 days in advance, but it would be pure luck if you were able to predict the weather 20, 30, or 40 days in advance. Like nature's weather systems, the complexity of nature's ecosystems prevent an accurate estimate of an event in the future. So, if at all possible, it's usually best to let nature do her own thing and let her own complex energy networks take over. So hopefully you are beginning to see a more concrete description of biodiversity and its relationship to the interconnected flow of life and life-giving energy on Earth. Biodiversity is the interconnectivity of nature that defines the existence of every living being on Earth. It is the life support system of all life on Earth. Remember, it's not just the species we are worried about. It is the complex interrelationships between species that need protection. Biodiversity is connectivity. Connectivity is biodiversity. Now, despite our inability to control nature, the one thing that we humans do know is that the highly complex interconnections in nature that we call biodiversity are central to ecosystem functioning and hence the existence and maintenance of all life on Earth. Any loss of biodiversity within any ecosystem is of great concern because we are unable to comprehend all of the relationships between living things within an ecosystem. Yet, the conservation of biodiversity is very important because biodiversity is connectivity. This is why it's so very important to identify, to understand, and to protect any connection in nature before we attempt to change or remove anything within an ecosystem. If we can't identify, if we can't understand, and if we can't protect, we should do nothing. Let's explore a simple example of identifying, understanding, and protecting a connection in nature. Let's examine the connections in a simple plant or tree leaf which you have found and are holding in your hand. The leaf is obviously a physical pattern we can see from its shape. But we quickly see a second pattern, the veins in the leaf. These veins are shaped in a tree-like structure that we call a fractal pattern. These veins serve a purpose. They transport energy to the plant and transport waste gases to the leaf for release into the atmosphere. The leaf is also constructed from plant tissue called cells. These cells are directly or indirectly connected to the veins. They contain chloroplasts which convert the sun's energy into useful energy for the plant. These cells also bring in carbon dioxide and release oxygen. So through the process of observation and understanding, we've been able to identify two kinds of connections within this leaf. We can continue by asking ourselves the same kind of questions about how the leaf is connected to the trees, how the tree is interconnected with the entire forest and with the earth. As we think things out carefully, we will ultimately see that the leaves, the trees, and the forest are the lungs of the earth that both supply life-giving oxygen and food energy to all creatures, including ourselves. Our analysis results in describing a complex web of connections in nature. We can then take our leaf and ask how each of we humans is connected to this leaf. How are we each connected to the forest, and how each of us is connected to nature? We will find that all humans have many of the same patterns as the leaf and the plant. First, we share some of the same genes. For example, mustard grass has 15% of the genes in the human genome, and our lungs and our kidneys have the same function and structure as the leaf veins. Like the leaf, we inhale our atmosphere and exhale our waste products. And of course, we have cells in our body. The fact is that there is a unity of structures and functions between plants in our forest and within us. There are connections on many levels. We know the forest because we know ourselves. When you hold that leaf, you are holding a little bit of you. When you protect the forest from clear cutting, you are protecting you. When you leave this webinar and find yourself examining how things are interconnected, I'd be ecstatic knowing that I've set the world view of connectivity in motion in your mind. The word consciousness is not just a philosophical, spiritual, hippie, or tree hugger idea. A consciousness about connections in nature is essential to the survival of humanity on this earth. Consciousness means being aware of something. Consciousness means the humility of stewards of nature, such as yourselves, instead of the prevalent, arrogant attitude of many humans and government agencies who wish to control and manage nature. A consciousness about connections in nature means that every time you engage nature, you ask yourself the question of how one creature, plant, or natural object is connected to another and to nature's greater scheme of things. In developing this kind of consciousness, you are automatically becoming a steward of your environment by becoming aware. You are then prepared to take your own appropriate action. The secret to resolving our environmental crises is to develop a consciousness for connections in nature within the ranks of young people. Many environmental organizations now realize that sustainability education is a powerful means to correct the ecological mistakes of the past. Instead of offering the common doomsday approach, environmental education uses stewardship to build a basic consciousness toward connections in nature that will serve as a foundation for sound ecological decisions in the future. As I close this webinar, I wish to share with you the wisdom of a man who will inspire you and help you think about the impact of an interconnection nature on your life and the lives of other human beings. This man received his early university education as a scientist. He was a chemist. But he gained his fame and respect as Pope Francis. Pope Francis emphasizes a connected nature, but on a wider scale that includes the interconnectivity of all parts of human life with nature. This includes mankind's social, cultural, and economic activities. He looks upon environmental education as a connection in nature because it passes a positive and active consciousness for nature from one human generation to the next. Pope Francis says that the world is a gift we have freely received and we must share with others. The world we have received also belongs to those who follow us. The environment is on loan to each generation, which must then hand it to the next, he says. His question is, what kind of world do we want to leave to those who will come after us, to children who are now growing up. Pope Francis is suggesting that like the sun or a forest, you are an important connection in nature. Yes, you, who is passing your knowledge, your value system, and your energy to future generations. The words of Pope Francis describe the challenge to all environmental educators and stewards of nature, who include the young people who are participating in this webinar. You are an important connection in nature because you have the power to affect the future of nature's environment by sharing yourself with the current generation of humans and helping this generation influence future generations. Both teachers and students who are attending this webinar series have the power to define the future of humanity and our planet. To each of you, I say that this is your challenge and your legacy. I'd like to close my presentation with a short video that I produced that summarizes what we have been talking about today.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay, good, good. Let me go back over this again. I apologize. God, I'm hoping, did you have sound on the movie? Okay, okay. So I'll repeat what I just said. I have developed a series of study guides. It's about 180 pages long, and it's a PDF document that is designed for classrooms and for field type education. And you can go up to my website called patternsinnature.org. You can see on here. And if you click the page, excuse me, the book cover, which is on the upper right-hand corner of the home page, it'll take you to a page that describes in more detail the lesson, as well as a table of contents, and it gives you a place to put your email address in and send it off, and you immediately get a download message in your email where you can download this thing. I built it over the period of about a year, and it's what I call a collaborative document. Those of you who choose to use it, I would dearly love it if you would critique it, if you would add your own study guides to it, if you would make changes, email all that to me, and I will put those in subsequent editions. So I'm going to be updating it regularly with the material that you provide for me. So that's what I'm offering to you. Now, does I'm trying to see here. Is anybody? I don't see any questions other than, wait a minute. Thought I saw one in here. Oh, okay. Elgin said, what do you mean by flowing network? Good question. A flowing network is well, let me define a network first of all. It is a web of interconnection. It's a spider web is a network, for example. But in this case, our networks are made of conduits. And through that network and those conduits, energy flows. And so that's my terminology, I guess. Flowing networks means that the networks are actually causing the flow of energy from one species to another, or one group, or one ecosystem. Does that answer the question? Elgin says, why are pesticides being used so much? That's a very good question. And it gets into something that's a favorite subject of mine, and I call it political will. I am quite critical of the agricultural industry. They have to live, they have to make money. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But the fact of the matter is they're looking for cheaper and quicker ways to produce our food. And of course, one of the cheaper ways to do it for them is to kill the bugs that come and attack their plants. And some of those pesticides were developed by Monsanto. One of them is called Roundup. And it is now known that Roundup is one of the chemicals that's responsible for killing the bees, but it also kills the milkweed that is ultimately destroying our monarch butterfly population. So there's just a huge impact here of these chemicals they're putting on. And it's a good example of people not having a consciousness for connections in nature. It's just, they don't think about those kind of things. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm kind of a evangelist, if you will, in the area of in the area of connections in nature, because I think by looking at connections in nature, we begin to appreciate why things like pesticides can be so damaging. Somebody asked me how I got interested in conservation. Well, that's a good question. I guess I've never really thought about it. It came kind of naturally to me, but my background is that I'm a true nerd. I was studying nuclear physics in 7th grade when I was a kid. Never was that interested in girls, never dated much in high school. And when I got to college, same sort of thing. I was really into technical stuff because my dream from being a little guy was always to be a scientist. And I wanted to be a marine biologist because my parents took me every summer to Lake Michigan. We went over to the Michigan side, Saugatuck, and that's where we spent our summers. And I became deeply interested in marine biology. So it was partly my parents and my environment that got me going into that. And ultimately, of course, I ended up in engineering school because it's a good basic technical education. And I went on for my PhD at Scripps Institute of Oceanography in San Diego. Conservation as a subject per se came to me because I became a whale scientist. I was studying gray whales, and I ended up in Mexico 35 years ago on a field trip, on a research trip, and I just never turned back. But I became very close to a group of people who I am close to this day. Most of them are Mexican scientists, a few American scientists, and I think it was really there that I built my passion for conservation, because we've got a lot of work to do down here. And I am on a scientific team with the state of Sonora where we're preserving an estuary down here. In fact, we had a big conference on it 2 days ago. But my passion is sustained. My passion for conservation is sustained by the fact that I'm in doing it every day with just a really, really great group of people. We just really love for each other, we care for each other, and we're out there as a team working on it. So that's how the passion is sustained. As far as how many cells in our bodies, I have no idea. Maybe one of the teachers in the group can answer that, but I've never really, I'm sure if I looked in a book. And the next question is, how can we make an impact in nature? The answer is back to this idea of legacy. You know, I'm 77 years old now. I've got 5 or 10 years of life left, and I'm trying to make an impact on nature by doing what I'm doing right here, by talking to you guys, because you're going to carry on. You're going to be the ones. We're in a sad state of affairs with humanity these days because nobody really cares much about nature. We're living in cities. We are disconnected from nature. We're not out there like it was 100 years ago, where people were living on farms and all that other good stuff. So you've got a challenge ahead of you on making an impact, but the impact is you guys. Picking up ideas from people like me, looking them over, evaluating, seeing if they fit for you and your kind of a message, and just going out and doing it. And I also am a strong believer in environmental education, as you probably can tell, but I don't do it getting up and teaching or lecturing. What I do is I train young people to become the teachers and become the leaders, because they're the next generation. And I've got a group of high school students who are both leaders and teachers, and we give environmental education programs for the younger set from 4th grade on. And I don't do any of the teaching. It's my students that do. And down here, of course, we're doing it all in Spanish, but we're taking, much like you guys do at Deb Perriman's forest, we have a wonderful estuary down here, and that's our classroom. And we get as many students as we can, get the school buses out and take them out there. And my students give them a 3-hour immersion into connections in nature. at the estuary and try to help them build a consciousness for it. And I think down here, you know, the old days, everything was garbage all over the place. I think just through seeing less garbage, I'm beginning to feel that we're making an impact. But the impact, the bottom line is you guys, and you're the ones that are going to be making the impact. And you know, I can be your fact person, much as your teachers can be fact person, but in the end, it's going to be your legacy. How is deforestation impacting the environment? Good question. I used the word lungs of the earth in the seminar presentation, and they're breathing. Just remember, the forests are putting out oxygen and they're absorbing carbon dioxide. The forests and other plants are responsible for your life. They're responsible for your life because they're giving you the oxygen to breathe. So deforestation is impacting you as a person. It's taking away one of the very essential items that you need for your life. And I can't emphasize that enough. You study photosynthesis. If you're into that, you can see it at a factual level. You can see it, you know, as something that's not just a test. It's a real part of what's going on in the environment. So start looking at photosynthesis and work your way up. And the oxygen in our earth is there because of the plants and the forest. What's my favorite memory while out in the field studying whales? The coolest, most memorable moment. I got a lot of memorable moments. I don't know if I can single out one, but one of my projects in the United States before I moved down here, in the late 70s, early 80s, is that I was in charge of a program where we were trying to define the pathways, the migration pathways of the southbound migration of gray whales. And we did it in Southern California, where we've got the Channel Islands. And I had a couple of young people stationed on each of the islands, and they were counting southbound swimming whales. And my job was to play daddy to a certain extent, make sure they stayed safe, because science can be pretty dangerous when you're plopped out alone on an island. And so I think my favorite memories were working with the young people and doing this kind of a thing with the whales. When I got down here in Mexico, I did a little bit of work. I was working with my graduate students, and the whales in this case were the vaquita. I don't know if you've been reading the newspaper, but the vaquita is an endangered porpoise because Mexican fishermen are avoiding the police, the fish police, so to speak. They're putting their nets in the water and they're killing the vaquita. But working with my graduate students was a really, really cool memory for me in working on that particular project. So again, I think everything that I've done as a scientist has become much more meaningful as I was able to transfer a little bit of my life into my family of students. Very, very important part of me, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing here. I think we've got just, how would I protect forests from being cut down? Woo! You're asking me to play God. The biggest problem I have as a scientist is politics. And we don't have time. I can give you some horror stories of corruption. I've been dealing with corrupt officials and with the political will of ranchers and agricultural people in the United States. That's where you have to start protecting. Some of these guys just really don't care about nature. And that's one of the biggest challenges you'll have. So protecting forests from being cut down starts in the political arena. And along with that, it continues with environmental education. I truly believe that good conservation comes from good environmental education. And once again, down here, we're not trying to stop the fishermen. What we're doing is we're going in and retraining their young people, their sons and daughters, so that the next generation won't be killing all the fish, and the next generation won't be killing the forest and all that kind of stuff. What can students do to help conservation? The word I like to use is conservation. I like to use the word connectivity consciousness or connection consciousness. I believe that if you start by understanding these connections that we just talked about, get skilled at identifying connections, and then sharing that knowledge with other students and other people. If you're in high school particularly, you have great power to take that information and then ask your school principal or your teachers, can I teach some of this to the 4th and 5th and 6th graders? Passing it along, that's your legacy that you can help build that's an act of conservation, a big act of conservation in my view. So facts are important, obviously, but then spreading those facts to a generation younger than you, I think, is probably the most powerful thing you can do. Okay, I think we're out of time. Anyhow, thank you very much. If you want, let me just take you over one last slide. My email address is here, and if you want to write that down and email me, if you want this seminar video, I can send you the URL. It's on both the mail and on YouTube. If you feel you want to use it, you're welcome to do so. So just give me an email and let me know. And of course, download the book if you want to use it anyhow. Thank you guys very, very much for your patience. I really enjoyed this. And your questions were really great. That really makes me feel good that you guys were coming back with some really good questions. Take care of yourselves.